This is James Mathers for the Digital Cinema Society at the first annual DCS Cinema Lens Day. Next, we're going to talk about optical perfection versus character, tuning lenses, all the different things you can do to build in character. Matthew Duclos of Duclos Lenses is going to handle the moderating duties, and I will turn it over to him now.
Thank you, Jim. So my name is Matthew Duclos from Duclos Lenses, and today we're going to be talking with Jean-Marc from ZEISS with their Supreme Prime Radiance. We're going to be talking with Art from ARRI with the Enso Primes, Chris from Cooke with all the Cooke lenses with character, the Cooke look, and Tim from Angénieux with the IOP technology. I'll let you guys do a super quick introduction. I'll start with Tim.
My name is Tim Smith. I am the Executive Director for Angénieux Americas, which is North America and South America, and we'll talk about this later.
My name is Chris D'Anna. I'm the General Manager for Cooke Optics here in Burbank.
I'm Art Adams. I am the Product Specialist for Cinema Lenses at ARRI Americas based in Burbank.
I'm Jean-Marc Bouchut. I'm the Head of Sales for ZEISS Americas.
Okay, so I have a handful of questions here for you guys. We're going to start with optical perfection. Traditionally, that's been the goal of lens manufacturers throughout the history of photographic lenses. But everyone's increasingly drawn to unique character. Everybody wants something a little different. But how does your brand embrace that push, that trend? Let's start with Jean-Marc.
Well, ZEISS is very well known for its perfection. We are a German brand. We have been building lenses for years. And, 20 years ago when we built the Master Prime, the idea was to have a lens that really performed very well, no very flat image, really clean image, and was at the time of film. So film really kind of created the look of the scene. And of course, when digital came and really with a new camera that has really just a very sharp image due to the electronic behind the sensor, we really started to see people using our old glass, especially the super speed, that really created a certain look. And when we came with the Supreme, beautiful lenses also, we talked to some DP and some of our clients, and they say, yeah, well, we love your Supreme. They are sharp, they are really nice, but we want something different. Sometimes we want something with texture. So what we came into making is changing some internal coating on a specific element in order to create a specific flare. And that's how we came with a Radiance Prime. So these lenses have been around for 4 or 5 years. I've been working with a lot of projects and really give a new look, a very creative look, especially when you have strong light in front of a lens. So one of the last projects is the new Zoom. We just have the first one here. You can really look at it. It's really a lens that we really dedicated for full frame. It's a Zoom. It's really the first Zoom with a modern just characteristic and with character.
We'll move on to Art.
So recently, well, I guess it was about 7 or 8 years ago now, we looked at what was going to go on with digital in terms of where we wanted to go, because previously we'd made lenses that were meant for film. And so we're showing Enso Primes over there right now. Our flagship product is Signature Primes, and that was a departure from what we'd done previously in terms of we had made lenses for film, and film has very different requirements. And for digital, what we wanted to do is look ahead and see in 10 or 15 years, where is all this going? And what we're seeing is more and more naturalistic images, because HDR, if you lean into HDR, they produce very natural images. Our display technology will produce very realistic images. And we ended up with a look that I think one DP described as like looking through a beautiful window, which was the goal. We wanted something that was like, if you're looking at someone's face, you're looking at their face. You're not distracted by sharpness or anything like that, but you can see all the detail. It just looks very natural. But then we also worked on the autofocus portion of the image and tried to roll it off as quickly as smoothly as we could, because the idea is that your eye is attracted to hard edges and areas of high contrast. And we wanted to do is, if we were going to create a really naturalistic looking lens at the point of focus, we wanted to make sure there was nothing else to distract you when the background rolled out of focus. So even at fairly deep stops, like 4 or 5, 6 outdoors, there's enough softness in there that your eye knows where to go. And then we also soften the highlights just a little bit because in HDR, if you're panning across a strong highlight, it'll strobe because very bright lights strobe. And it's not due to the technology, it's due to your brain. But if you soften it just a little bit, it strobes less. So our flares tend to bloom a bit more. They glow, and they really dig into the shadows. And then the Enzos are a little bit of a rougher version of that. They're more of a affordable, but we couldn't make the same quality lens in a smaller package for less money. So we chose some very specific places to compromise. There's more astigmatism, which actually looks very nice. The illumination fall off is a little bit different towards the corners, so it's a different vignette profile. And they're contrastier. They have a little bit more snap and crispness. And because we're able to loosen up the specs, we also got the close focus dramatically improved. So signatures will do 1:7 magnification. These will do 1:4. So Enzos will give you about the size of a postcard on virtually all of the focal lengths, which is generally very close focus. So that's kind of the philosophy behind the base look of the lenses. We also created some rear optics that are basically like adding an additional element to the lens that introduce imperfections like spherical aberration, coma, astigmatism. We have 2 different ranges for each lens family. We have positives and negatives. They're based on positive and negative diopters. They each kind of do the opposite of what the other one does. For example, one in the background will make very smooth, ultra smooth bokeh, and then the other one creates donut bokeh, where highlights turn into, they have hot outer edges, and that tends to emphasize textures and backgrounds. So that's the nickel tour. I'll stop talking now.
Okay, then we'll move on to Chris. I think you have the challenge here because your practically the entire product line is character rich.
Well, so the question was about perfection, right? And
the question was about unique characteristics.
Unique characteristics. Well, we're going to use optical perfection as a baseline when coming to design a lens. And then what our designers are going to do is draw parameters and say, do we really need that much resolution? How much resolution does the camera really see? Do we need the camera to see, do we need more resolution than the camera could see? And then you start walking things back and you realize, oh, let's peel this, let's peel that. Let's make sure we could design something that's most suitable to the application, which in our case, 99% of the time is going to be narrative cinema. What's worked for narrative cinema has often been a slight obscuring of the image when it comes to the texture, resolution, warmth, dimensionality. We want to know if Cillian Murphy's going to look good on our lenses. Does he look fantastic? Yes, he does. That is a parameter. We want to know how good rendition's going to be, how good a performance is going to be. And for every one of those things, we're going to draw our line. And that's what's going to shape our philosophy. So the character that goes into our lens is actually a whittling away of optical perfection and landing at a point where we could say, okay, the Cooke look is this, 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 and this. Let's come back to that for every series we define. And every series does have its own unique characteristics. It may have shallower focus fall off. It may have a little bit more resolution. When we went to full frame, it was a big deal. We wanted to do that. But how do you bring something that has, such an obscure, beautiful texture, bring it to something that has higher resolution and requires more light? Well, you whittle it back. You keep walking yourself back and you draw the line. You say, okay, this is where we want this to land. This does the job. This makes Phoebe Waller-Bridge look great in anamorphic. And so let's go with that.
Okay, and then we'll go on to Tim with the IOP.
So I'm with Angénieux, and I'll talk about this in just a second. But our engineers approach designing a lens, they would never use the word perfection. It's just the opposite of that. When you're in a room with somebody who thinks they're perfect, they're the worst person in the room. We look for character. We look for the artistic merits of a lens. Art is in the imperfection of a lens. We've even used the term with engineers that we're looking for desirable imperfections. So a lens that looks perfect on a lens chart is probably the last lens you want to point at a human being, unless it's Monday Night Football. There are perfect lenses out there, but they don't serve stories that we tell. They have another purpose. So to that end, that same concept drove us to make something called an IOP, which is an internal optical palette. That's this optical piece of glass here. This allows in our prime lenses to let the end user, the owner, the operator, the DP, whoever has to create that look, insert this piece of glass inside the lens between the elements, which then changes the character of that lens. So you go from a very beautiful Optimo Angénieux look, which is a very specific look, to many different looks in the same lens. Our lenses, all of our lenses, are really expensive. So to have a set of lenses that can have multiple looks and multiple feels is the concept behind this IOP. Basically, this is a filter, but you have to stop thinking of it as a filter. This one is a clear, but you can get a glimmer or a black magic or whatever you want to put inside to change the character, but don't think of it as a filter. Once it's inside, it's more like an element or a coating. It changes the way, the character of the lens. Once it's inside, you filter the front the way you always do. You could put glimmer inside and still put glimmer in the front. It's just about the way the lenses look. So I can shoot a sci-fi film with one filter and I can shoot a period piece with another IOP. So that's sort of the concept. We want the end users to be able to do this without having to, lack of a better term, detune their lens, which is very time consuming, and there's probably only one person in the building that could do it, to something that's fairly easy at the rental house level. It's a tough concept, but we do have one over there if you want to really dig in. That's all taken apart. You can look inside a lens. I could teach everybody here how to do it in 15 minutes. I would say, though, that just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. Just trust the right person. You're putting a screwdriver right next to an element. Be patient. Don't give it to the guy that just had 5 cups of coffee, but it can be done. So that's our concept.
Or leave it to a professional.
Always leave it to a professional.
So, Tim, you touched on this a second ago. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And Chris, you touched on this also about starting with having a clean starting point and dialing it back. Where do we draw the line? And this is a question for anyone that wants to jump in. Where do we draw the line between encouraging character and just careless, poor lens design, optical design?
Anyone else here talk about careless, poor lens design?
I would, actually. I won't say the name of the lens, but
Thank you.
I won't even mention the name of the lens, but there was one lens that somebody asked me to test. We put it up on a projector. I didn't have it I'm not a big fan of judging a lens on a projector. It's on a camera, on a skin tone, but it's going to get on a projector at some point. And we popped it up on the projector. Technically, it was awful. I thought, this is a product that's for sale. The edges were unevenly off, not even off equally. The center was soft, it breathed. And then there happened to be a recognizable cinematographer with me at the time. I won't say his name either, but when I put it on the camera and he happened to walk over and look at it, first thing he said is, that really does some interesting shit in the corners. And I thought, I don't know how to judge this, because he liked it, but it was awful. And I'm all for imperfection in lenses. So I don't know if there is an answer to that, except when you look at something, you go, I don't know what I'm looking at. Maybe that's when the lens is just too horrible, but all sorts of things are acceptable, I guess. It's a creative choice. Some people like cheap red wine and some people only like expensive stuff. So
That's a really good analogy. I like that.
It reminds me of the AFC lens test, the French Society of Cinematographers lens comparison. So what they did was they have it's a blind test. They have a scene in 2 shots and they repeat it endlessly with different lenses. And each time a new lens comes up, there's a little code in the corner, and they give you a sheet of paper with a code on it, or with all the codes on it, and you mark blind which lenses you like. And they say it's not a comparison test, it's a discover your taste in lenses test. And it's really interesting because they go through all of them once and then they mix them up and go through them again. And it takes a couple hours. And it was just fascinating. And what's interesting is to compare your results with other people and see what they like. And I mean, people are just all over the board. So clearly there's a lens out there for everybody. And yeah, is there a bad lens? Well, I think the bad lenses do the majority of people not like it. But other than that, there really is no definition of what a bad lens is.
To clarify that, something I've been preaching for years, there is no such thing as a bad lens. There's different lenses for different projects. Jean-Marc, did you want to touch on that?
It really depends on the characteristic you are looking at. I'm just watching the One Piece series that was shot 10 years ago, and they use the Alexa and they use the Kowa, some old Kowa lenses, and some wide shots were very kind of unsharp. So I went on IMDb and say, what did they use? And and of course, they use old lenses, but it's it's a piece that takes place in the 18th century, so it makes sense because of a story. But if you want to really sharp, you really need to really just think about what lens to use. Like blind test is always like a great idea. Triangle of Sadness, that one came 2 years ago. Basically, the DP just gave like a list of lenses to his camera assistant and just say, okay, shoot a scene for me. Don't tell me which one. And just at the end, they picked the Supreme Prime because that was what they wanted for the look. The story is strong. They wanted to shoot in a remote place in Greece. They wanted a reliable lens. They wanted sharpness. With character, of course, they decided to shoot with the Supreme Prime, and the movie is fantastic. So it really just depends of the look and you want to achieve at the end.
One of the things I do want to say, though, is that since there is no wrong lens, and that's true, there are poorly built lenses, so don't confuse the two. That lens that did interesting shit in the corners isn't going to last 2 weeks.
That is a good distinction to make. A lens that is not designed mechanically well is going to be a liability on set, and you can't have that. A lens that's designed poorly optically, that's subjective. You guys are just setting up my segues perfectly. Jean-Marc, thank you for that. I wanted to touch on the increasing interest in using vintage lenses and how that's affecting the look of the lenses that you guys are producing nowadays.
For example, we choose to play with a coating, and it's really something that you see on vintage lenses. The coating in the 1950s, 1960s were very simple, was just a single layer of just coating, and you had like a lot of reflection. At that time, people really didn't like the flare. It really took like Easy Rider to become like a big kind of blockbuster movie, and where they really started to use like flare for kind of telling a story. Film people didn't like the flare because it was like ruining the film. They didn't really know to control it. I just, recently when I was flying just to LA, I just saw Duel on the plane, and just saw beautiful flare, especially the last scene with like a nice zoom on the main character and with the sun in the background, and just the beautiful flare coming into the image. So Spielberg shot that because he wanted to tell like something kind of, about the stress, about the kind of just psychological like thing of a story, and it's beautiful. But after you can pick, you can really get really lenses that really can tell you like the story the way you want. And as Matt say, using modern lenses really help because the vintage lenses sometimes they are not very precise. They can be challenging, they can be dirty, they can be really not clean. So your modern lenses really give you like a kind of a big advantage and save time on the shooting. Yeah,
we've been making a version of our speed Panchros for 100 years now. The latest version is our SP3 lenses, which has the same focus fall off as those speed Panchros from decades ago. And so it's interesting that we're kind of relying on our own vintage foundation and legacy and holding on to that. I think it took the vintage revolution for us, I think, to fully realize, oh, people like that. They like that stuff from years ago. Oh, they keep using our lenses. We don't even make those ones anymore. And so we had to embrace it. We did. We had to, if you can't beat them, join them. And then it turns out, oh, they liked us all along. And so we find ourselves making something that we've been making for nearly the entire life of the company. And then, of course, modernizing in ways. It has say on our cinema lenses, they have metadata. Our eye data, syncs with cameras, and our newer lenses sync with today's market and today's newer, smaller mirrorless cameras. So give the people what they want.
You have to adapt.
I don't want to be contrary, but vintage is a pretty generic term, what a vintage lens is. There are beautiful lenses from our past that we can't reproduce. We won't be able to reproduce. The lead content of the glass plays into it. Angénieux, my Canon days, there were certain lenses that had a lead content in the glass that's no longer legal, that can't be reproduced. And the roll-off of those lenses was very much had to do with the amount of lens. We couldn't do this with coatings. I know that we call them legacy lenses, but the lenses that are not our current line of lenses, we were told 15 years ago, you can't make those anymore. You are allowed to make one more batch. So we made as much glass as we thought we could. And we're now out of those parts. So if an element breaks, it can't really be reproduced the same way. I don't know. I think we can go for an older look, a period look, or try to copy something. But the older lenses are beautiful, but modern technology is not going to let us make them again. So if you have a set, hang on to it.
So Jean-Marc, you stole my next question again. So rehousing lenses can bring a lot of advantages, upgrading, so to speak, the mechanical design, which corrects for a lot of downsides. But what are some of the advantages and potentially more importantly, the drawbacks of a rehoused vintage lens compared to a newly produced, we'll call it tuned lens?
I think people use vintage lenses because there is, at the beginning was question of price. When red one came into the market, people were looking for glass. They had the money, it was in 2008. The camera was not very sensitive. So the super speed lenses were on the shelf collecting dust. I remember Duclos telling me, I got a call every day for a set of super speed. So I sell them because they are not used. And every day I increase the price by X amount of dollars, and people still buying them. And that was the necessity, like it was in 2008, 2009, because of the sensitivity of the camera, and people didn't have the money to offer the master prime or ultra prime for that camera. Then, things become a trend. And of course, for just full frame camera, the K35 were the only vintage lenses available covering that format. So K35 became a trend. Even, teams say you put a K35 on the projector and you say, why this is costing so much? Some are very sharp, some are not sharp, but this is a trend. This is people play with them and they really like certain characteristics. So you can really change that because the glass is no longer available, the coating they use at that time is no longer available. So reproducing a K35 modern that looked like a K35 built by Canon in the 1980s is almost impossible. But people, like it for some of their story, and this is part of the thing we have to deal with.
Just to jump back to my alma mater, I was with Canon for a long time, and we chased that K35 look forever and couldn't do it. And they invented those. If you're looking at vintage lenses now, I think that's great. The drawbacks, consistency between the glass, between the focal lengths. Older K35s tended to get yellow, so you might find there's a way to fix that if you know how. You got to radiate them and things. They're also radioactive. They'll set off a Geiger counter, which is true, but that's just it's an urban legend. You're not going to go sterile. I just wouldn't hold it in my lap all that long. But it's consistency. So you've got to find somebody who really knows lenses that's rehoused them. You don't want the mechanics of an original K35. They just don't hold up. But I've seen some beautiful stuff. If you find the right person who's rehoused them correctly and you get them to match well, it's a great choice.
Something I was going to say too about vintage image representation is, and actually also back to perfection and modern lens design. It seems like we're always talking about imaging in a two-dimensional space, When in cinematography, we're dealing in a three-dimensional space. So we never factor in, oh, hey, maybe modern lens design is really good for helping with focus breathing. You know, that you don't realize that, oh, we might have designed a better lens for cinematography, taking modern design elements like corrective elements, which are not a very sexy part. You know, we always talk about the deconstructive side of lens design and representation, but there's these other factors that are going to make a cinematography lens that much more useful in today's world. You know, we want our focus pullers to be able to find focus. We want those images to represent stuff in a meaningful way. We want to, we want limited breathing. So don't just look at it in the two-dimensional space. Always kind of examine your cinema lenses in a three-dimensional space. See how they focus in and out. See how they work mechanically. You know, you might be fighting an uphill battle dealing with the vintage mechanics. Even though the vintage glass has this beautiful representation, it may just not function quite well in the modern world, especially when the stakes are high on a set.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the reasons we invented or came up with this rear filter setup that we have with our signature and Enzo lenses. Is now you've got lenses that you can distort, but the color is going to match all the way through the set, and they're going to be consistent and predictable, which a lot of vintage rehoused lenses are not. I do also feel like I'm going to be a little contrary here. I don't know that there is a trend towards using vintage lenses and going for those imperfections, but at the same time, we've sold more signature primes faster than any other lens ARRI's ever made. They're very popular, and I think it's just a matter of taste. And I also think it's interesting, for example, the movie that put signatures on the map was 1917, which is a period piece. So you're not necessarily bound to use a vintage look for a vintage film or use a clean lens for a modern film. It all depends on what your taste is, and I think that's what it falls to more than anything else. How are you going to tell this story? What do you like? Some people like the really funky abstract look that you get from vintage lenses. Some people like a very clean look where you can see the reality of what happened in front of the camera. Personally, I like seeing the detail in sets or in faces. I like to see the light, the way it impacts, like it hits shadows. I don't like murky shadows. I like to feel the environment, and that's one of the reasons, and I'm not just saying this because I'm with ARRI, but I just like those kinds of lenses because I like to see the subtleties in a scene. And I think that's one place where, for example, our lenses really shine, but then at the same time, if I think of them as like race cars, I can put speed bumps on the track by putting something on the back and I can trip them up really fast, but still come up with a consistent look that's predictable.
So thank you guys so much for joining. It's the DCS Lens.
Thank you.
Thank you.